thank you for making this music licensing, an early morning, relatively early morning meeting when we've all traveled to talk about this big, messy topic. But thanks for being here. So my name is Vicki Nauman, and I run the consultancy Cross Border Works, and I have been doing this, been working in the digital space since the very beginning at one of the first legally licensed music products back in 2000, which was Real Networks and JB with the major labels at the time. And I still go back to that moment where when I tried the first Napster, my first thought was all of entertainment just changed forever. Film, video, music, we no longer will have to dig through the import bin and the cutout bins, and it's hard to even remember what it was like before we had access to music. But the second thing that I thought was everyone's going to make so much more money. And for years, people made fun of me for that, but I've always maintained that I believe that the industry will be bigger than it ever was before, and I think we're just starting to see that. So what I wanted to talk about today is really kind of the status of music licensing, where we are, where it's going with the metaverse, and because of the nature of my business, I get to have my hands in lots of different pies, and I work with so many different companies, large companies like Oculus and Beat Saber, early stage startups. Lots and lots of companies have been contacting me, and it's actually been exhausting in the NFT and metaverse space, and having to re-explain how the industry works over and over and over again. But I also feel like underneath all of that, I'm incredibly bullish about the future of music, and I think that we're just starting to see some of these early new business models and new experiences that can come out of these new technologies. And so I feel like we have a lot of problems. We haven't figured everything out, but I think we'll get there. And I think that we really have a ton of potential to activate music in a way in Web3 that we just don't have now. So what I want to do is I did a talk with Music Ally last week, and there was some media around that. But what I really want to do is I want to kind of compare and contrast how what we have now is going to be different in Web3, and then specifically what the implications are. And I also want to go a little bit deeper in some of the licensing issues. So one thing to remember about everything with Web3, which I consider to be NFTs, blockchain, crypto, fractionalizing rights, allowing users to participate in the creation of new works, as well as participate in the back end, as well as the more experiential things like the metaverse and virtual worlds and artists performing as avatars. That whole spectrum. It's really, really early, and I think everyone needs to kind of be, if you're interested in this and if you work in this industry, you kind of have to just take the trials and errors and the failures as a grain of salt, because it's very similar to the way it was when we were setting up the first internet back in the late 90s and early 2000s, when a lot of companies failed, but out of those failures out of the ashes rose the phoenix of new business models and things that companies like Amazon came out of that time. But I think the other really important thing about Web3 is that it's really screaming for new business models. Nobody wants a full catalog of 60 million songs in the metaverse. Nobody wants that. It's about artists, and these are really, really complicated conversations that are underway. I also believe that there will be millions and millions of metaverses, and that we can't even quite foresee what all of this is going to be right now. And there's some things that harken back to experiences that we know now, other things and technologies that are around the corner. I mean, it will not be long before we will be having holograms in our living rooms, and our business meetings will feel like we're around the table, even though we're instead of being on Zoom. But with Web3, things are very artist-centric and very experiential and very early. But let's what I want to do is pull apart what we have in Web 2, because I think that's really critical. So with on-demand streaming, just historically, that took us about 12 years to get a viable on-demand streaming model. The industry was disrupted in the late 90s, early 2000s. There were download models, all sorts of things that were probably pretty good ideas in those early days, some really terrible ideas, but we didn't have networks, and we didn't have storage, and we didn't have bandwidth, all of these things. But it took about 12 years for on-demand streaming to really, really take hold globally, to the point that labels and publishers looked at it and said, okay, yeah, this is here to stay. This is a viable revenue stream. Around the same time, the UGC social media also took hold, and that was a really significant one, because there was so much resistance to it at the beginning. For many people in the room, you may not have been around, you may have been in college when all this was happening, but I actually had contracts from major labels that were explicit that you could not present their music in an application if there was any sort of UGC element, because UGC was considered to be so inferior, and that it would sully up this perfect music. And there was a certain point in time when everyone just gave up on that, and they said, users are doing things with our music that we couldn't have possibly anticipated. And so it was around the same time, 2010 to 2012, when both social media and UGC and on-demand streaming took hold. And those are really the foundations of how our business works right now. Sync has also evolved a lot. It used to be just very straight ahead, TV and film, and now it's just fully into games and all sorts of synchronization uses inside of audiovisual products. But when we look at Web 2, some of the things that we're still doing are really left over from the 90s and the 80s. We're using the same metadata that we've always had. We finally have it digitized. We still are releasing 3-minute singles. The only reason there are 3-minute singles is because of radio, and the only reason that there are 10-song albums that are released is because that was the storage capacity of a CD. But we still have all of these containers from previous years, and we also have business models that have been set and that we've been operating for a long time. And so one of the things that's so exciting about the emergence of Web3 is we don't have the limits on containers, and we don't have to adhere to the existing business models. So, while the technology industry is really focused on reimagining what the internet could be, I think for music, we really do have a window to reimagine what the models look like and how we light those up and make money off of it. So 4 things I want to talk about related to all of this is music licensing in general is always a mix of norms and laws. And there are some things that are highly governed by copyright laws, like on-demand or like radio-style streaming. Almost any country in the world, there is some sort of statute that if you are doing a radio-like experience in digital, that you can get a license for that. Others are completely based on norms, like synchronization, where sync isn't really written into copyright laws. It's just a practice of how we've gone about making the master and the publishing 50-50, that we clear things in a certain way, that we have to get all of the publishing in advance. But that's very much based on norms. And then we have things like on-demand streaming, which are a mixture of norms and privately negotiated, as well as some statutory agreements. But for Web3, we don't really have any of these norms in place yet. There are certain things that kind of feel like a sync, and there are other things that don't at all. If you're running music in the background of the metaverse, is that the same as running music in the background of a game or of a venue? But I think, and I say this at every single event where I'm speaking, is that if you are representing or you are at an early stage NFT or metaverse company, there's lots of companies out there that have been pitching me that they are operating outside of copyright laws, and that the copyright laws don't apply to them. And I always like to just say, I think I think it's fairly clear that you are indeed operating, even if you're in the metaverse, even if that's a virtual territory, you are still subject to copyright laws because you have real servers and you have music that's flowing from your servers to end users and you're collecting money somehow. But I think there's a critical need for new business models. I see no end in sight for the use of synchronization. Almost all of the most interesting creative uses that I see are coming out through games and immersive experiences, and that requires synchronization. And for my business, because I have come out of product groups at Sonos and at Real Networks and working inside of companies building products, I always look at what are the products and what are the business models and the user experiences. So Web 2 and Web 3, the products and experiences are really fundamentally different. In Web 2, everything that we know now, whether it's social media or on-demand streaming, it's all about catalogs. How many millions of songs do you have? Is the value proposition that the user comes to your platform, can find anything they want, anything that's been created. Web 3 is almost the opposite. No one is really looking at any of this. It's all really about an artist, and it's about an artist and lighting up the relationship between the artist and fans. So we don't necessarily need everything, but the licensing, the implications of that are that if you're licensing an artist, then we don't really have many structures in place to pull together all of the rights around an artist, the various songs they've written, the different publishing, their artist name and likeness. This kind of goes against the grain of doing catalog licensing, and it also pushes the boundaries of synchronization, because sync is always traditional, one or two songs here and there, not hundreds and hundreds of songs. The other thing that is really, really important is a lot of the young companies that are starting up and building some of these new experiences. It's with everything with music, there's always the iceberg, right? So the user experience, that's what you see. That's the tip of the iceberg. But underneath the water, there's an enormous tech stack, and that's where liability comes in with your rights and how you're managing your licenses. How are you going to ingest and host the music? It took us, at least 10 years to get, DDEX and the value and the supply chain set up properly. And I guarantee you, none of these companies that are building out the metaverse are thinking about it taking DDEX feeds. So we have to reorient all of these young companies around what needs to be done properly. But the paradigm is not necessarily exactly what has been done for Spotify or Apple Music. So the other thing that is really different between Web 2 and Web 3 is around business models. And with Web 2 business models, everything is volume-based. So if you are an artist or you're a label or publisher and you have music that's in social media, that's in Spotify, Apple Music, any of the on-demand streaming, Deezer, any of the on-demand streaming platforms, if you have volume of use, your music gets played over and over and over again by fans, it gets on playlists, and you have an incredible volume of usage, you're going to make money. If you are an artist who's maybe not a hobbyist at the bottom, but in the middle layer, which is usually independent labels, maybe signed to a major, but they haven't broken into the 1% range, or truly independent artists, you have dispersion of fans around the world, but you won't necessarily make a lot of money in these models if your music is not streamed in huge, huge volumes. And with Web 3, it's almost the opposite. This is not really about volume of usage. It's really built around engagement between the artist and the fans, and then how do you monetize that? And how do you create a better connection and get the artist and the fan relationship to be at the center of the monetization? And this doesn't even have to be in Web 3. I'm working with a couple of different companies that are really artist-centric, and they are not necessarily building out with blockchain, and they have an eye into all of that, but But there is a whole new crop of business models coming around like this that are really trying to surround the artist and their fans. One of the things that's a huge challenge here, well, big opportunity first, which is I think that some of these models might work for artists where the existing Web 2 models are not working, because those artists still have passionate fans. But the challenge around this is every single artist agreement is different. And so you can be signed to a major label and be able to go and do a live stream or be able to do an NFT and just get approval. You have others who are signed to a major label and they're completely restricted from doing that. Independent artists may not completely know what their rights are. Artists on independent labels may not understand any constraints that they have in their contracts. So when I work with my clients and companies that are trying to light these experiences up, it's really difficult because you can't just take a cookie cutter approach. So in closing, we do still have a lot of issues around not only how Web 2 operates, but also these emerging experiences in Web 3. And I'm just going to list some of these because I'm hoping that there are some people in the room that are working on some of these problems that really need to be solved. We still have issues with sound recordings, publishing, and PRO metadata. Huge problems, silos all over the world. We need to clean it up. We need to find incentives, and we need to find really good working examples of the benefits of when you have clean data. The second thing is these artist-centric models. This is from live streaming to Web 3. These, I see a lot of models that are emerging that are very artist-centric. And this is counter to the way the sync departments work because they license songs, they don't license artists. It's also counter to broad digital business units because they license catalogs. And so to get an artist application or something lit up, you need all of the constellation of rights around that artist, but you also need artist name and likeness. And it poses a lot of questions around how do you create models? Who gets what piece of the pie? Do you pay the artist? Can you pay the artist? Or do you have to pay the label? If the artist is doing a lot of extra work to pull their fans in, should the label be paid for that? If the artist has sound recordings out on 5 different labels and you want to use all of them, how do you pull all of this together? Really, really challenging and complex problem solving. But I think with a lot of things in this industry, the real substantive changes that I've often seen are when artists demand the change. And I also see a lot of artists with Web3 starting to say, no, I want to do this on my own. I want to carve these rights out. Some are having success, some are not having success. The other huge movement that I see happening is what I call bulk sync. And this is where maybe you need 50 songs, 100 songs, 500 songs, 10,000 songs. And it's really difficult if you license the catalogs to match up the publishing on the back end. But this is another problem that is just ripe to be solved by combination of technologists and rights holders who want to try to enable it. A huge issue is dividing up the pie. We have the on-demand streaming models where publishers got 10 to 15% and labels get 50 to 58%. And there's a lot of publishers that are jockeying for position to get a bigger share, and I can't blame them. But the labels don't want to give up the share, and so I have a couple of different deals where by the time I came into the company, they had made conversations and they're way over 100%. They're at like 130%. I'm like, okay, guys, we can't do this. So I think there has to be a rebalancing between the master or the sound recording and the underlying publishing on who gets what share in these new models. And the last thing I will share is really that like the royalty-free models are absolutely on fire right now. And people saw what Epidemic Sound did, where they owned the sound recording, the publishing, and the performing rights. Don't need to license anyone else if you license through Epidemic Sound. And there are a ton of companies that are setting up kind of quasi-royalty-free. Lots and lots of friction around that. Huge opportunity for it. But this opens up all sorts of questions around PROs, and what is the future of PROs, and how are we going to, how are we going to have this huge mix of, catalogs that have the ability to grant the rights, and then you have conflicts later when you do go get into, performance licensing. But this is a really, really big trend out there. And finally, will copyright laws ever catch up? I don't know that they will. Right now, we're lagging in the past, but I think that with Web3, we are, I cannot imagine that we're going to have a lot of copyright law changes and movement that's going to keep anywhere near the pace of change with everything around Web3. And the approach that almost all of us are taking is that we don't know. I get labels and publishers calling me all the time saying, "What's going on? What are you guys doing?" And I'm like, "We're making it up. We're making it all up as we go." But we're private licensing everything. And just making sure that, well, we don't know what the norms are. We don't really know what the laws are, but we're trying to draw from models to the past and then paper deals and make sure that the companies are covered. And then there's a lot of Wild West that's, not licensed at all. But I always aim to try to get things licensed. So that's it. That's what I have to say. And I don't know if we have time for questions, but I'm going to be around. So if we don't have time, you can answer. You can find me.
We don't have time for any question, but all the area is for you, so feel free to exchange during the break, during the lunch, and everything is possible. But we have a lot of content. And thank you, Vicky. It was very interesting.